it is bones. And in this one, let's go ahead and take a look at some custom work. Now, specifically, this is going to be a video that I have talked about before, where I will be showing you all of the mods that I can do to a DC Multiverse McFarlane figure. Now, figures do change, sometimes from figure to figure. The design, the execution, the engineering, all of these things can be different. So, this is just a base to give you some ideas of how I add articulation to some of my DC Multiverse figures. Now, I don't want to hear anybody in here saying, "Oh, you you have to modify and change McFarlane's figures because they suck." Because there is a lot of Legends tutorials and Legends mods and even Mafex, other companies. So this isn't necessarily to say it's a bad figure. It's just if you want to get a little bit more range, a little bit more articulation, you can pretty much follow this pattern. Now I'm going to do this with the gold label Superman 1000 that was recently released. For the most part being because he does have a lot of problems. This is basically one of the first body bucks that McFarlane made. So at the time, he didn't have it down pat. More recently, he's started to add a little bit more different things. But as I said, this is just an outline to get you a little bit more articulation if that's something that you're looking for. Now, first, we'll take a look at the figure and then I'll explain everything. Hopefully, I don't miss anything, but I did try and get as much down as I could. You do know that I'm not a big fan of tutorials or filming while I'm doing customs, but I had promised this video, so I'm going to go ahead and try and knock it out. So, first up, let's take a look at this Superman 1000 gold label from McFarlane. Now, the two major big differences were the cloth wired cape with the yellow S in the back, and they removed the previously used sculpted Superman shield on the chest, and they opted to go for a printed on emblem. Another thing is they kind of gave it a metallic look, which I really wish they would have gave it just the classic colors, yellow and bright red. But once again, this leaves the door open for McFarlane to release another Superman. Now, I do want to bring that up as well, and that is that I think right now McFarlane has made about 50 Superman figures or Superman related figures. And for people still out there, saying that, oh, McFarlane only makes Batman, 1,000 Batmans, he makes a lot of Batman, but he has branched out the line and made some really deep cuts, as well as giving us a lot of base characters like your Supermans and your Wonder Womans. So, first impressions, pretty cool. Now, this is going to be a big shock to anybody who buys a more recent McFarlane figure because, once again, this is a original mold where they hadn't really brought out any innovation or more updated articulation, but we'll do the best that we can. Now, first off, great head sculpt. I still think that the Superman 1000 McFarlane head is the most classic Superman head that we have received. He does look down pretty well just to start off, as well as he looks up, but just not as much as you would need for flight poses or for very dynamic posability. So we'll take a look at that. Then you got the shoulder, which it's so tight that you can't even move the bushing that the shoulder socket has. That's supposed to allow you to get a lot of range and movement, but it's kind of tight and doesn't allow for all that dexterity. So we'll take a look at that as well. Now, on this Superman figure, I have already changed a couple of things. I painted the wrist ball joints to a flesh color. It just looks a lot cleaner and more aesthetic. And I changed the ankle joints, which were those huge ball ankle joints, which I'm not a big fan of. And I swapped them out with some ankle joints from John Kent, which pretty much match the red color and gives it a slimmer, more streamlined look at the ankle while you still maintain a lot of good articulation. Now, of course, we've got to talk about the waist articulation because, of course, when you get this guy out of the package, no front crunch. Now, McFarlane is known for having a lot of leaning back, backwards movement. And for some reason, this Superman just doesn't have almost any at all. You got the side to side, but it's really tight, as well as the tilt-a-whirl, which also is a little bit restricted. And once again, no forward crunch to speak of. Now I'll show you all the mods that I do to get a lot more movement and range out of the waist. One more thing I want to attack is the legs because as you can see, it has very minimal thigh swivel, which is something you need to move the leg from side to side as well as the boot. And if you don't have that thigh swivel, it really limits the articulation in the legs. So we'll also take a look at that. But once you're done, you should have a more articulate, smoother movement Superman in hand. So I'm going to start with the lower body and go up. But first thing you got to do is take them all apart, everything. Take off the head, take off the arms, take out the shoulder discs, separate the torso from the abdomen, pop out the legs. Now, something weird is that usually the little clamps that are like on the harness of the lower carriage, they come off with the legs when you pull, but for some reason they stayed on this hip apparatus and I just had to go with it. But usually it doesn't come apart like this. Usually that little unit comes off as well, but we'll go ahead and adapt and move along. But once you have it all separated, one of the hardest parts is taking out those little pegs that allow movement from the inside of the thigh, the hip area. So you do need to boil some water and drop the legs inside there. Now, I don't recommend using a heat gun, although I do have a heat gun that I use. I recommend using water because it just softens it up more uniformly and doesn't have that risk of melting the plastic. But once you leave it in there for a couple of minutes, you can grab some needle nose pliers and pop these pegs out of the portholes. Now, once you have those out, what you want to do is if you look at the legs, they're real thick plastic and they even have some excess plastic that you do not need. So I just take a really sharp X-Acto knife and cut out all of the excess plastic that it has, as making it as thin as I can without cutting it to where you could see it from the outside. So the top part of the thigh and the butt cheek are not going to be damaged. You're doing this from the inside. And what that allows is for more movement at the hip swivel. And you want to try and make it so thin that when it does hit the plastic of that undercarriage, the butt kind of folds in because it is so soft and thin that gives you an added little amount of movement. So once you have all of that done, before you put it back together with the trunks and everything, I do cut the undercarriage. If you see, it has two little clips. Now, figures can be different. Some have a whole solid piece, but this one has like little prongs. But I cut off the very top edge. And once I put it back in the trunks, you can see how it leaves a little gap. That gap is going to allow your Superman's abdomen to bend forward and take over that space. So it won't hit that little hard plastic and not move forward. It'll really accommodate more movement. So you got to cut the upper part of that little slit that slides into the trunks. Now, once you reassemble them, you want to snap those legs back into the undercarriage and they'll just pop right in. Moving up to the lower abdomen. Now you're getting into the ab movement. What you want to do is you want to get a Dremel. You can do it with a blade and you don't have to have too much fear that it's going to show because that part sits inside the trunks. But you also don't want to take out too much where the hole is because that'll make it loose and flop around and you don't want that. as well. So you could see here where I dremeled out a notch, just enough to give the figure a little bit more movement to go forward. And now that you cut out that little piece of the undercarriage, that gives it even more room to move forward and give you a better crunch. So you warm that up, pop it back down onto the ball peg, and now you have the abdomen connected in there. Now, the next part is the upper part of the abdomens. Now, a lot of people have done this, and there's different ways to do it. Sometimes you do have to be careful because when you cut it out, you don't want it to be exposed when you articulate the waist. So you got to keep, a little bit of a line around the circle just to not make it too ugly or unappealing to the eye. But as you can see, I got kind of a head start here and I cut a little bit in front. But what you want to do is cut the whole circular around and give it a nice little valley, a little cut, and that allows the peg to move with more movement. Now, once you get enough cut around, that's going to give you the side to side and the tilt-a-whirl of the figure. You do want to get your Dremel or get a blade and notch out the front part, which that's going to allow, once again, the peg to move forward and give that Superman even more crunch that we've already added. So once you're done with that, warm it up, pop the top part of the chest onto that part, and now you almost have a complete Superman. But now we're getting into the shoulders. Now the shoulders, remember, didn't have any movement in there, and this is something that I usually do. Now, you can get your Dremel and bore out the inside of that socket to give it more, to give it a gap to where that shoulder ring that bushing can like float around in there. But I only like to do that if it's really necessary because you're really, digging into that plastic. So what I've learned to do is I warm it up, I find something wider, which is usually the end of a screwdriver. And when it's heated up, I stick it in there and move it around, make expanding it a little bit, and then I leave it there until it cools down. Once you pop it out, you could put the bushing ring back in there, pop in your arm, and now the bushing ring will move a lot better. You get more movement, which allows you to move the shoulders forward or lean them back in a wide chest pose. So you do the same thing for the other side, and we are almost done. Now, the final thing I'm going to do is the head. Now, I've shown this before. It's nothing new. One thing that I am happy with is the height of the head. You don't really need it any higher or any lower. The peg is perfect, but you do want to heat it up. You want to pop off the head, pop out the peg, and you want to make, once again, you could cut it or you could make it with the Dremel. It just depends how clean you want it to look. Now, as you can see, I made a little, cutout on the back side of the neck. And when you push the neck peg back, you can see how that allows for more movement back. Now, this Superman had a lot of movement forward, so I'm not going to bother with making a cutout in the front. But what I really want him to do is to look straight up. Now, another thing that restricts the articulation with this is the hair. And the way I do it is there's different ways you can Dremel it. Sometimes I just get the utility knife. But what you want to do is on the inside of the hair, you want to cut off as much as you can and make it as thin as you can. And the reason you want to do this is because when you articulate it and you push it back, you want that hair to flex and give, and that allows you to put the head even higher and look straight up because that plastic is not so thick that it restricts the articulation. It's thin enough to slide back and move, and you don't have to chop it or cut it. And when you put it back down, it has that same look without knowing that you actually made it thinner on the inside of the hair sculpt. So all of that is done. I've done all the mods, all the modifications that I could really think of. Now let's go and look at the different things and how they move now. So let's look at the thighs. You have a lot of thigh swivel now. You could really see the movement. If you cock up the leg a little bit, you could see how much movement you have in there. This allows you to really move the boot from side to side without having a thigh cut He can kick up respectively, but he can kick back really far. And when you put the leg back, the trunks go back to their original shape. But this adds so much movement in the hips for posing. And all of that comes from all that work we did with the lower legs, with the lower body. Now, let's take a look at the waist. And this is this is where it really, comes in that you could see the heightened articulation. You got a way more range of side to side. You got that full tilt twirl and it moves so effortlessly now. And you can get that crunch where his chest almost touches the top of the belt, almost in a sitting position, and you can lean him back, which before you couldn't really lean him back at all, and now you do get some lean back for flying poses. Take a look at the shoulder, which now when you move it around, that socket moves around. I did do both sides, and you can push the shoulders forward, or you can pop them back and give them a broader superhero stance. So that just adds to your options of posability and range. And finally, the head. Now, he looks down even more than he did before, which is really surprising. But that little cutout just gives it more room to flex and move around. And of course, when you look up, he can look almost straight up, even so much where you could see a little gap in the front, but that's not a problem if you want to get him in some flying poses. So after all of that, this figure really becomes a lot more fun in hand. You could pose them and move them around in so many different positions, crouching down, flight poses. You can go ahead and add some alternate hands, which really opens up your posing and your figure photography. So I found him a couple of fists and some added hands just to have a lot more fun when you're doing figure photography. Really opens it up. The added articulation, added alternate hands, all the range of movement is just awesome. Now, one thing I wanted to do, and this was just going to be the final touch, and that was that I wanted to repaint a little bit and add a matte sealer to the body just to tone down that plastic look. It was really shiny plastic, and even though it doesn't kill it completely, once you put the matte sealer on, you can see how it tones down the shine a lot more. A little bit of touch up on the face paint and the hair, once again to tone down that shine. And you have a complete Superman figure that is really fun and just takes it to a whole nother level. These I bought at Walmart for $19.97, so around 20 bucks. And now you have a very articulated, really cool Superman 1000. Now, we know McFarlane is continuing to add on to the articulation and make different body books. A lot of Superman, a lot of different heroes coming out. Hopefully, the ingenuity never stops, and in the future, we'll have all the articulation that our hearts desire. But, anyways, you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.